Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the APPG. This morning's meeting really comes out of our last meeting, where many of you will know that there was a lot of discussion and significant concern around permitted development, how it might affect town centres, and we decided we should focus a particular whole session on this, and so we are doing that this morning. I'm really pleased that joining us this morning is Max Tolley from the Royal Town Planning Institute, and Max is going to open our session this morning and talk an overview of the proposals and some of the implications, and then I'm going to ask Ian Fletcher, who's from the British Property Federation, to give some talk about how they see the impact on town centres and commercial property. After that, as usual, there'll be time for an open discussion. And at the end of it, I think probably parliamentary colleagues, we should probably give some thought as to whether or not we wish to take it any further in terms of writing a letter to the government to express our views, seeking a message, or inviting one of the ministers to our next meeting, or working alongside the select committee, who I know also are doing an inquiry into this. So that will come when we get to the discussion stage. But initially, welcome to you all, and in particular, welcome to our speakers. And first, Max, very good morning. Thank you for spending some time and giving us your insights this morning. And can I invite you to address our meeting this morning? Oh, sorry, one thing before you start, I should say to everybody, can you please stay on mute until we get to the discussion stage? Max.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, Max Tolley, I'm RTPI's England Policy Officer. So delighted to be speaking to yourselves this morning. I think just for a bit of context, just to start with the sort of the use classes order system, which I'm sure many of you will be aware of, but just to do a quick run through of it and how it links with this whole agenda. So it was introduced in its current form in 1987. It's been amended a number of times since. Principally, it puts uses of land and buildings into various categories, which are then known as the use classes. And generally, these categories are outside the definition of development and therefore outside the scope of planning permission. So, to mention the fact they were introduced in 1987, come last year, 2020, the government looked, and it's been last year, the government looked to do a significant overhaul of the order for a range of reasons, but just to list some of them. For example, when you to your local and under one single roof, you can get shopping as A1. You can sort out your banking and insurance, which would be classed as A2. You can have lunch in the cafe, which would be A3. And then if you happen to work there, retire to your office upstairs, which would be classed as B1A. Or to take a tool hire shop, you might have somewhere's retail that's open to the public, and then some that's only for trade. And then up to the very more recent times, you've got creative co-location of businesses' uses, shared and flexible spaces, pop-ins, for example, all of which led to this overhaul of the use classes order system, and principally what is known as Class E, which subsumes a lot of those uses into one sort of super use class, if you like. So it's Class E is defined as a general commercial business and service use class, which covers retail, food, financial services, gyms, healthcare, nursery, offices, and light industry. And critically here, movement between these until now different uses will no longer require planning permission. So that was 2020, and then roll forward to 2021 and a government consultation on permitted development rights. The beginning of this year, and of which the government has now responded, and will be, following this consultation, introducing a right to allow conversion from any use within Class E to residential use through permitted development rights. Application can start from the 1st of August this year. Limitations on the right include the fact that evidence must be provided that the Class E building has been vacant for at least 3 months before a prior approval application can be made. There's a floor space limit of 1,500 square metres, and a range of prior approval matters that the local planning authority need to be satisfied about, including transport matters, contamination, flooding issues, noise, and adequate natural light will be provided in the development. More generally on permitted development rights itself and this particular development, the Royal Town Planning Institute has set out, along with many others, how we're concerned that permitted development risks poorly designed housing. It challenges a local planning authority's ability to deliver both mixed and efficient land uses. And it also challenges the ability of local communities to engage in development, for example, if there's no planning application to comment on. And the role of planning committees is also not applicable in these situations. It also potentially undermines the ability to agree to deliver locally agreed visions, such as through the local authority's local plan, if permitted development can just sort of take place sort of outside of the scope of that local plan process. And it removes a number of issues from the planning system. So particularly on this right, we're concerned that if from the 1st of August, and it's to many extents a big experiment, this one, does take place on a large scale, it would lead to a loss of active frontages, which would have which provide informal surveillance and add to a vitality of an area. So you'd remove that if you had large-scale residential use on a high street. And we've also sort of raised concerns, which I think particularly become more apparent in the last year or so during the pandemic, that if you lose that access to essential services, such as convenience stores, pharmacies, solicitors, post office, if they're converted to residential use, that would particularly impact on those who can least afford to travel, and it also risks reducing local employment opportunities. So sort of whistle-stop tour there, Stephen, of how this all plays from our perspective.
Thank you very much, Max. That's extremely helpful and very informative. And I think there'll be a few questions and comments. Well, I know there'll be comments, but there will be some questions as we go along. So thank you. Ian, good morning. Can I ask you now to address this, please?
Yes, certainly, Chair. Thank you very much for introducing me and for the invite along today. I'm very grateful. As Max has said, I'll try and sort of segue from his comments. This is a bit of an experiment, and I'm going to sort of set out, I think, some context and then express some concerns from the perspective of commercial property investors. Well, we represent long-term property investors. There's pension funds, insurance companies, and the like. They're investing in not just a building, but its context and all the elements that make a good place and how all those elements fit together. One concern, I think, with retail to residential conversions, very sort of technical one almost, is that it breaks up the retail frontage, and therefore shopper footfall, the way that people shop, tends to be to sort of go up and down a high street. You'll have particular anchors at either end, and what you end up with is what my members would describe as a high street of broken teeth. There are some commercial uses, there are some residential uses, and it doesn't fit particularly well together. I think town centre policy over the last 10 years, certainly since the Portas review, has been to also encourage cultural, social and community uses into town centres, so that communities have multiple reasons to go to town. I very much fear that those units will be the first units to go under this policy as landlords cash in on converting low value rental commercial use to residential use. As Max has said, to ameliorate some of the impacts of the policy, government has placed a size limit on it. So that is 1,500 square metres. But arguably it's the small units in the town centre that will attract the new retail startups. I very much of the view that high streets aren't dead; they've just been in this sort of slightly moribund for the last year or so, and that there will be big appetite to open up new stores and to breathe life back into our town centres. And it's that small business space that will be lost. I think there's a fear that in taking more commercial activity out of town centres, that rather than sort of underpinning demand and therefore activity, it will actually accelerate town centre decline. It will also, I think, lead to less income for councils. Typically for the same size of footplate, council tax generates between 20 and 60% of business rates from a commercial use, and even if a unit is empty, the landlord is still paying empty rates on that unit. And of course, there are no Section 106 obligations with permitted development rights. I should sort of hold my hands up and say that the last 10 years of my life has been dominated by trying to get residential into town centres. I promote the build to rent sector. I'm therefore not against residential in town centres at all, but I think it needs to be planned. It has different characteristics than commercial uses, and in planning it, you often have to think about town centre fringe sites and clustering of residential rather than it being sporadic along a high street. I think, as Max has highlighted, there are different impacts out of town. He's, I think, already highlighted the potential loss of convenience stores. Many of us, including myself, have come to rely on those over the last year, and very much supports other government policy in terms of walkable neighbourhoods. And I think we could also end up with homes in inappropriate places, office parks and the likes, without local services. I am conscious that this is the APPG for town centres, so I won't expand on those concerns. I should finish by stressing I'm glad the government is on the front foot on town centre decline, and I admire that, and is considering what it can do to support town centres. But in this case, I think I would rather have seen them promoting local solutions with local councils who appreciate the particular characteristics of their town centre. As their government is actually doing that in most other spheres. If you look at funding policy, towns funds, high street funds, they're very much focused on local solutions, but this is sort of very much a sort of top-down policy. So I hope that sort of gives a flavour of some of the commercial property concerns, but very happy to take questions.
Ian, thank you very much. Number of people are on the call today, and I'm going to take some contributions and ask a few people perhaps for comments. I don't know whether any of my parliamentary colleagues would like to kick us off or whilst some thoughts, but I'll come to them in a moment. But I know Mark Robinson's on the call, or he was a moment ago. Oh, there he is, yeah. Hi, Mark. Good morning to you.
Hello.
I don't know whether, you were on our previous call when we discussed this. Whether you want to give some initial thoughts and reactions to Max and Ian's remarks.
Yeah, look, I can't endorse everything that's been said before more enthusiastically. I think they're well considered, measured remarks that reflect the complexity of the issue here. I think, so just to explain, by the way, I am chair of the High Street Task Force, which
Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned that too.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I know you and I know each other, but there's a much wider audience today, and thank you for arranging this because this is a really important topic. You know, the government is doing an awful lot of right in this space at the moment. I wouldn't have agreed to be chair of the task force if I didn't really genuinely, honestly think that this is the most concerted effort to really make a change in place in a generation. It's really quite exciting. But with this one policy, they are at risk of undoing all of the good that they're doing with the more general planning reform, with the interventions around the money that's going into high streets, so the Future High Street Fund, Towns Fund, and Levelling Up agenda. It's just this one thing, and there just seems to be this. I think there's, you know, and we're just talking about the planning white paper. Class E is wholeheartedly endorsed by most of the property industry, and most, you know, I've done a report with Create Streets calling for a better quality of conversion of retail to residential, because we've been doing it for decades. We've been doing it for centuries practically. If anybody walks their local town centre, the periphery of their high streets will have been converted back to flats. We just tend to not do it very well. So if we're going to do it, and it has to happen, we're about 30% over space, let's do it better. But the idea that we have removed the ability to protect vibrant retail frontages is scary. You know, and it will undo the great work that the government is doing on a national level. It's going to undo great work that's happening on a local level, and it'll also undermine heritage work. So I spoke to the heritage parliamentary group about this. You know, I sort of slightly disagree with Ian. I don't think it's just places where there are low economic values that will be changed. I think where there are high residential values, they will change as well. You know, I think you could see, yeah, Northcote Road, where I live, house prices are really quite high at the moment. There's a lot of vacant shops. And one thing that I think is misunderstood sometimes with policy making, and I've again had this argument with Nicholas Boyd-Smith, who's a very trusted advisor to the Secretary of State on these matters, is once they turn into flats, they stay as flats forever. You know, so Class E is a flexibility of use. Yes, something can become a hairdresser's, it can become a bookies, it can become a drop-in centre for community uses, or it can become a vibrant little shop. But once something is converted into a flat, once that investment, those tens of thousands of pounds are being made, the physical nature of the shop has changed, and it's been sold off on a 125-year lease, it is now pickled in aspect, and it stays as a flat or flats forever. And that's the undoable nature of this change that really scares me, because by the time we've realized the damage that it might inflict on vibrancy, and we create this gap tooth grin that Ian was talking about, we won't be able to undo it. And that will be a long-term undermining of the vitality of many of our fabulous, vibrant places, not just our place which is left behind. Finally, I do understand the Secretary of State and central government's pressing need to address the housing agenda, and this is what's driving this, because there's no industry body. You know, the High Street Task Force does have the sector leaders group, and we have everybody within the placemaking community is represented, and there is not a single organisation in the placemaking community, and that's from the RTPI, OJ, IPM, believes that this is a good idea, and it could be changed very, very easily. All that people are asking for is an ability for local communities to be able to protect their vibrant high street frontages. What happens to secondary streets? What happens around the corner from our high streets? Frankly, yes, let that be converted to whatever the market dictates or whatever the need is. But if we can't protect our vibrant places, or places that we believe should be vibrant in the future, we're going to make changes which we won't be able to undo ever again.
Thank you, Mark. I don't know whether parliamentary colleagues want to perhaps give some thoughts about reactions from their areas. I know that we've got various people on the call. Is Sarah Olney with us today? She's due to be joining us. Let's see. Peter Gibson, would you like to say anything? Ah, yeah. Well, I have Peter's thing. When you were speaking, Mark, I saw Lisa Carlson, who is the director of the chairman of the board of directors of the Association for the Town Centre City Management. I think I'm correct in that title, Lisa. I've got that one right. Yeah, good.
That's right.
I saw you nodding during a couple of those comments as we go. I wonder if you'd like to say anything.
Yeah, I'm also the Chief Exec of the Canterbury Business Improvement District, and really pleased that we've got the office of Rosie Duffield joining us today. I just wanted to agree with Mark's point about conversion to residential, that it can't be undone, unlike other change of uses within Class E. And a point related to that, which is something that Max pointed out, that in terms of conversion from Class E to residential, one of the factors that will be considered is the amount of time that the unit has been vacant. 3 months is too short. It's too short to determine, it's too short amounts of time, even pre-COVID, I would argue, to determine that something can't be used for something within the current Class E. And I think what we're facing this at the moment, and what we're trying to argue is that we need genuine public access. So Mark was pointing out lots of different options there, that it could be a shop, it could be community use, it could be post office. So we used to talk about active frontage, and I think that's still valid. But genuine public access is I think what we need to try and protect, and then protect the ecosystem of our town centre. Because if we have, yes, we need more residential, but if we don't do it well, then how are we going to serve the residents within our town and city centres? How is that ecosystem going to work? So just needing to look at it in a more joined up way with significant local input.
Do you think, have you come across a view of what is the relevant timescale? Because 3 months in any normal commercial transaction might be quite a, might well be a reasonable amount of time, for a transaction to take. So 3 months of something standing vacant sounds to be incredibly short. Do you have a view? I mean, are we saying it should be vacant for about a year, or is that the sort of have you come across I don't know if anyone's come across a period of time that they think is appropriate, because I think that would be helpful if we're going to write I suspect what's going to come out of this is an agreement to do some action. So is there any views on that?
Well, I would say that goes back to really needing local input, because I think a lot of what these proposals are doing is taking away that local control, because this could vary so much in different places. Even within Canterbury, where I am, we've had a site that was vacant for over 10 years. It was a hotel, and now it's a hotel again. Complicated land structure, and it would have been a real shame to have lost that within a primary shopping area, have lost that whole site entirely to residential. Now it's a hotel that will support a significant part of Canterbury, but also the shops all around it. So, and in other cases, we've seen things change faster, but some sites, the land structure is really complicated and it takes time. I would argue 10 years is too long, but you see the point.
Yeah, and I think that point on local input is something that we should bear in mind quite carefully. I see Karen Pengelly was nodding her head quite vigorously at this point. Would you like to say a few words, Karen?
Yes, thank you very much. So I manage the Business Improvement District in Epsom in Surrey, and this week alone I have had 3 of our small service businesses come to me saying that their leases are not being extended, that the owners are looking to redevelop. This is a podiatry and foot care business. It's a destination business. We have domestic appliance repairs, dry cleaners. These are all small businesses that are disappearing, and with that, long term, the viability of business improvement districts to be able to work on vibrancy, recovery, and it damages our income. it's the local, I think, is the important thing that's been emphasised so much this morning, and things vary from place to place and from street to street even within that place, which is why I think that local knowledge and understanding is absolutely key here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. If anyone wants to speak rather than me just randomly pick on people who are nodding their heads, please put your hand up or show in the chat function. I mean, that would be extremely helpful. Peter Gibson, Peter, do you want to say anything? Just have some comments about what feedback from your local area, just give a parliamentary view, that would be helpful.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of what's happening here in Darlington, we're already starting to see a number of properties converted into residential units, and that's been very positively welcomed, really, by both traders in the town, and there's been an appetite for those houses. I think we're perhaps an exception to the rule at the moment in terms of the buoyancy of our local economy, in part due to the decision of the Chancellor to relocate half of the Treasury to this town. So we are experiencing a little bit of a boom. So we're perhaps not the universal picture, but there is genuine concern, I think, that the changes that are afoot do bring about good quality accommodation. And from what I've seen of the projects that have taken place here in Darlington, the quality of the accommodation is certainly there, and the appetite from buyers to acquire those properties is certainly there as well. We all know that our high streets are never going to look like they once looked. I had a meeting just last week with the company that owns the largest shopping centre in our town. They also own quite a number of others, and they're facing problems right across the country with their town centres, with shopping centres that are not full. They're having to reduce rents, and some town centres are having to take over some huge problems, and they're taking some very radical action with the demolition of huge swathes of commercial property. Just along the road in Stockton, there is, I believe, proposals to demolish a whole shopping centre, which effectively opens up one half of the high street to a river frontage. So there are some very innovative things happening out there, and I think bringing back some individuality to our town centres is going to be the key to making them attractive to people. I think we have all become used to seeing an identikit high street, and I think as we certainly emerge from the pandemic and we see new businesses start up and take over some of those spaces intermixed with new residential units, I think we're going to see a re-emergence, or I hope to see some re-emergence of some individuality for our high streets, which will make them much more attractive places to be.
So your concern clearly is the removal of the local input.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Yeah, good. Indeed. Well, I'll come to you offline, if I may, for some comments, perhaps for something we might put together afterwards. I think Christina Kaiser wants to come in. Christina?
Hi, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm Christina Kaiser from the Local Government Association. We would certainly echo what many others have said about removing the ability for councils and communities to make locally led decisions, which is really important. One of the issues that's just come up is about quality as well. So we know that the government's own research has shown that a number of these conversions to residential, they have not met adequate design standards, and they've really avoided contributing to local areas and often create worse living environments. They lack access to green and open space. That's also an issue for people, and we've seen a lot of it during COVID. Extending PDR means councils will lose out on more Section 106 contributions to affordable housing, really at a time when they're needed most. And it also takes away councils' ability to provide wider placemaking standards as well. We've done some numbers, and communities have already potentially lost 16,200 affordable homes in the past 5 years through these conversions. And they affect people disproportionately. So vulnerable are more affected, and it often exacerbates existing inequalities. So I think we would say that there may have been some quality conversions done, but for the most part, they're not, and they really don't support, ensuring that high streets have the kind of mix of uses that they need for vibrancy. And we would say that really the decision to extend permanent development now is quite a hasty response when we're still trying to understand the impacts of COVID.
Thank you. Matthew Davis, you have your hand up.
Hi, everyone. Yes, thanks very much indeed for bringing me in. I suppose I'll echo a few different points and perhaps come at it from a different perspective. So I'm head of membership at the Institute of Place Management. I also work with about 100 business improvement districts in the BID Foundation. So, I mean, I agree with everything that the planning experts on the call have said, BPF, RTPI, and Mark as well. Our perspective is one of place management and leadership. So we've conducted studies over the past 20 years as to what exactly are the ingredients that create sort of vibrant and viable high streets. And the answer time and again, backed up with evidence, is developing this shared understanding and vision alongside all of the local networks and partnerships in a place. And in a way that is sort of coordinated, collaborative, and I suppose, in a word, planned. So Peter's point is spot on individuality of high streets as well. I mean, our recent research shows that town and cities are already making a progression from template retail to being more multifunctional. In 2019, I think we can say that about 8% more towns can be classified as that multifunctional kind of space, bringing in different offers and different uses. So we're making progress. And the reason why that started to happen, because it does require that cohesive system and that planning to achieve, really. And I think one thing we noted in a response to the recent inquiry is that I think the irony is that the jury is out very much about how much this PDR measure will actually do for economic growth and for housing stock. Because we're talking specifically about small units, which it'll be hard to get scale from. And on the other hand, we already have large-scale conversion of shopping centres to housing, funded in many cases by large government pots, which is excellent. Basildon, they're planning 2,800 new homes in a former shopping centre. Bournemouth are doing the same. Peter mentioned Stockton, another great example. So we need to differentiate between the shopping centre discussion, which I completely agree on, and here this is isolated retail units that are dotted around high streets. And I suppose, yes, in some places we are seeing vacancy rates of up to about 19% in the northeast on latest surveys. But, I think the ambition is to bring a mix of uses back. And the worry is that collaborative planning process really will be, it's not just about removing one or two units in certain areas. It's about going against the whole ecosystem here of getting collaborative buy-in and planning what those new multifunctional centres will look like. So, yeah, and I'm happy to share any sort of evidence after the fact as well here about some of those studies that shows what's needed in local places. Just one more thing before I let others come in. On the issue of length of time of vacancy, I personally think it's not about a standard time span, as Lisa was talking about. It's about an evidential requirement if we're going to go down that route to show that vacancy is entrenched, and that often is so complex and contextual to the place. So that's another thing that we raised in this response. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for the chance to come.
Thank you. And apologies for the noise in the background. It's House of Commons is moving on to the next piece of business. We're not all going to have to rush off and vote. I noted also in the chat, and everybody will, Stefan's remark about a minimum amount of time it takes to bring forward commercial deals, which is not unexpected. I also saw Mark Inger from the GLA's remark. Mark, you've got an interesting perspective. I wonder if we could ask you to just elaborate on that briefly, and then I know I can see a few other hands up and I'll bring people in.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so at the GLA, I work in the 24-hour London programme. We're trying to work with boroughs across London to kind of think more strategically about their kind of areas and town centres at night time. We recently published some new guidance for boroughs on creating their own individual nighttime strategies, and we're very keen to see that our high streets and town centres can work effectively at night time as well as during the day. It's not all about bars, pubs and clubs. It's about how you can use our town centres more flexibly to support more flexible lifestyles, particularly in the wake of the pandemic. And we also realise that the nighttime economy has been very badly affected over the course of the last year. There is a worry about putting residential next to existing NTE businesses. The agent of change principle goes some way to kind of deal with that, but that's mainly in kind of new developments. We're very keen to see that the high street and town centre can work effectively for everybody across the whole 24-hour period. And as I say, it's about making sure that people have access to the goods and services they need, not just going to go out to kind of hospitality and leisure, but also can they go and do their shopping later into the evening if they want to? Can they go and go to the gym when they want to? That kind of stuff. So it's about having a more flexible and accessible approach to the high streets and town centres at night time.
Thank you. Brilliant. Mark Robinson, your hand's up again. Let's come to you, and then I've got a couple of other people who got their hands up.
Sorry, I wanted to very wholeheartedly agree with Peter Gibson and then echoed by my colleague from High Street Council, Matt, this idea about individuality. Nobody's more passionate about dramatic change being required for our high streets. And speaking to the Stockton example, I worked with Stockton Council on that strategy. I actually sold them the shopping centre, which they're going to be demolishing. So I know these things intimately, and it's fabulous what they're doing there. But there is nothing radical about 20 or 30% of shops on a parade being poorly converted into residential. That's unradical. That's boring. That sucks vitality out of it. And that's the only thing that's the thing I think we're all talking about here. Nobody is suggesting for a second that we shouldn't be demolishing swathes of shopping centres. I'm personally, in my business life, we're one of the biggest operators of shopping centres in the UK. We are actively pursuing that strategy on tens of shopping centres in the UK. We're not against radicalism, but what we are, and this PDR as it's framed is the opposition of radicalism. It's incremental erosion of vitality, and that's what I'm, as you can probably tell by the way I'm phrasing, quite passionately against.
Yeah, and everybody will want to see that Mark's put in the chat a comment about here's a report to have a look at ways you can do retail to resi better. So I'll leave people to download or read that. Eleanor, can I come to you? Eleanor O'Brien, who's the membership manager for the National Craft Butchers, is that right? Have I got your...
Yes, right? Yes, that's correct. Thank you very much. I wholeheartedly agree with everything everybody has already said, as I think most of us do, and without rehashing that, I just wanted to highlight improper planning process also is a real risk to existing businesses. So you may have empty units that people may want to fill, but when residential property is put in without proper planning, without proper management, you end up with a rise in noise complaints. You end up with both late night premises and those like our members who maybe rely on actually having their businesses at risk due to residential noise complaints. That can often be dealt with through proper planning process and making sure that the residential property is appropriately managed. So we just really want to highlight that existing businesses can also be put at risk if it's not managed properly.
Thank you. Right, is there anyone else who'd like to come in at now? I am detecting a fair amount of unanimity from this call about that there is much in the planning orders and planning changes that people like, but the permitted development rights have some real implications for high streets, and that it would be sensible if this group, I think, therefore, wrote a letter just pointing out some of the evidence we've heard today, some of the suggestions we've heard today, and some of the comments. And I will, with OJ, draft something and then send it to parliamentary members of this group and publish it so that others can see what we're doing. Parliamentary members to get their agreement, and others so they can see it. Because I think, given there is a select committee investigation, and given the government should hear the views of experts as well as parliamentarians, I think it would be sensible for us to do that. And so that is what I intend to do, unless I hear objections from parliamentary colleagues. I'll get that done, and we will circulate and input that. Our next meeting is due to be in about a month's time, and in the next couple of weeks I will circulate the details of that and what we're going to discuss. I don't know if, so before I close the meeting, because I think we've had a useful and important meeting this morning, but I'm not a great fan of staying on meetings just to stay on them. I think we've done our business for the day, if everybody agrees, and therefore, with my thanks to Max, particularly for opening the meeting and giving us some real thoughts and some of the details, and to Ian as well for some opening our discussion. Thank you to both Max and Ian. Can I just thank you all for attending, and as I say, I will make sure that you all get circulated with a copy of the letter, and I will arrange for that to be circulated to everybody. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to seeing you in a month's time, and as I say, I will circulate what the details of our discussion then in the next fortnight. Many thanks.